Good morning, Rabbi Rabotai. We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Nun Het, the halachot of Kriyat Shema, and Daf Sadi Aleph Amud Bet of Dafei Mishna Berurah. In Seif, Hey Maran writes, Im nenas velo kara Kriyat Shema, arvit at she'ala amud hashachar. What do you do when you are in a situation that you did not daven and did not say Shema properly until Amud HaShachar? In other words, for instance, imagine if you davened Arvit early and you wanted to put the kids to sleep and you fell asleep with them. And you wake up early in the morning and it is around Amud HaShachar. So it's not Netz yet, but it's Amud HaShachar. Can you say Kriyat Shema of Arvit after Amud HaShachar? Says Maran, and this is of course what we had already in the Gemara in Masachet Brachot Daf Chet Amud Bet. Maran writes, you could say it Kevan Sha'adayin Lo HaNetzach Hama, because already is Amud HaShachar, but not yet Netzach Hama. It's not sunrise yet. Koreh Kriyat Shema v'yotze ba'idei chovat Kriyat Shema Arvit. You could say Shema and announce it basically night and follow that opinion that until Netzach Hama still is not day. But says Maran, this comes with a side halacha, that once you do that, im haya anus, if you're forced now to go out, you're going on a path that may be dangerous and you don't want to risk saying Shema on the way, which usually, again, in a regular case, what you would do would be say Shema early on after Netzach Hama. Maran says on this day you cannot do that because you already mentioned it as being night. You made today's Amud HaShachar being part of night, so you can't contradict yourself and now announce it as day. It's either day or night. A similar thing to this is every day happens by Mincha Arvit, especially when you have later Shkia and you want to daven early and go home. So you start Mincha after Plaga Mincha, and then you want to do Mincha Arvit right away, back to back, and go home. So can you do Arvit after Plaga Mincha? Well, yeah, according to the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara, is night already after Plaga Mincha. And Plaga Mincha is over an hour before Shkiat Chama. So can you make that Arvit? Yes, but not if you daven that same day, Mincha after Plaga Mincha. So either you have to make your mind, either daven Mincha prior to Plaga Mincha, and then daven Arvit after Plaga Mincha, or daven Arvit before Shkia, the Mincha rather before Shkia, and then daven Arvit after Shkia. This way, you have one Shita, at least according to one Shita, Mincha was during the day and Arvit was during the night, so that covers your thing. We do find, again, I realize that this is opening can of worms, because we do find in some Rishonim that this was the old minhag of the Sfaradim to do Tarti the Satri in some ways, and so on, the Rashba, the Ran. So I want to close the parentheses before it becomes too sensitive, because we're not talking about Mincha Arvit right now. But in regards to Shema, Maran writes, you could rely on the fact that Amud HaShachar is still night, but then you can't the same day make it day as well. Say, well, I fell asleep, I didn't say Shema of Arvit, so I'm going to use it as Shema Shel Arvit, and then I'm also going to use it as the start of the day because I have to go to Makom Gidudei Chayav Melistim, and it's necessary for me to make it like that. Lo yikra as Kriyat Shema pa'am shenit latzet ba'idei chovat Kriyat Shema shel yom sheme'achar she'asa ota sha'a laila. Once you already announced after Alot HaShachar as night, says Maran, I efshar lachzor v'la'asota yom. You cannot go back and now make it also day. It's either night or day. You can't be a hypocrite. It can't be a tarti de satre, and therefore you have to keep it consistent. Says the Mishna Berurah,
That's only the same day. So the next day you could contradict it?
So that's a very good question. That there are those who say that you have to stay consistent within your decision, but at the very least, that same day you can't do it. And that's the halakha. Push comes to shove, you could change from day to day. It would be best to be consistent in your shita, but if you need, you could be inconsistent as long as your inconsistency is not within the same day. If you are Tati de Satri within the same day, that's hypocritical. You can't be this moment today is also night and is also day. You can say, well, today I'm relying on this shita, tomorrow I'm relying on that shita. That still it has some merit, but again, within the same day you cannot do it. So let's.
Before Alot, you say the nighttime Shema first and then morning blessings. Or what if you say morning blessings? Can you say nighttime Shema afterwards?
Well, morning blessings, you don't. It's not. You made it morning blessings. It's not called morning blessing. Even though we say Birkat HaShachar, you can really say them. The Ben Ish Chai writes, if you're going to sleep after Hatzot, you could even say that the brachot before you go to sleep. So that's different than saying Shema, which is B'shoch V'cha V'kumecha. And again, that brings us actually to what the Chafetz Chaim writes, because when you talk about Netzach Hama, that still is not Netzach Hama, Umiktzat Anashim Yeshanim Be'oto Azman. There are a group of people, a percentage of people who are still sleeping before Netzach Hama. Can you believe that? Some people still sleep before Netzach Hama. So therefore, it's still considered night according to some people, right? Ronnie certainly doesn't relate to that. Right? He's here like 5 o'clock every morning. Baruch Hashem. So you have some people who are still sleeping by Netzach Hama, and therefore up until Netzach Hama still could be considered B'shoch V'cha, Lachen B'shat HaDechak, even though the halachically speaking Amut HaShachar is considered day, B'shat HaDechak, even though that's called day, Legabe Kriyat Shema, we call it Siman Shchiva, time of sleeping, because there's a group of people that are still sleeping at that time. Lachen B'shat HaDechak Karina Beh, Gam Ken B'shoch V'cha, Aval Belav Hachi Afilu B'di'eved Lo Yatza. But if it's not, push comes to shove, if it's not a extenuating circumstance, even B'di'eved Lo Yatza, because really Amut HaShachar is already halachically considered day. Now, because the time between Alot HaShachar and Netzach Hama is considered Zman Shchiva according to some, the Rabbi Eliezer Popo, the author of Pelei Yoetz and Chesed Alafim, he writes that a Ger Tzedek, that he went to dunk in the mikveh in this period of time, right? He went, they gave him an appointment early morning, Kam Yalla, and he dunked in the mikveh between Alot HaShachar and Netzach Hama, before Netz. What does he do? So says the Pelei Yoetz, he should right away say a Kriyat Shema and have kavanah that I am, if it's night, if it's considered night, it should be my Kriyat Shema mitzvah d'oraita of the night. Even though that at night he was a goy, but maybe right now it's considered still night according to some for the halacha of Kriyat Shema only, because it's called B'shoch V'cha. So you don't want to miss your first mitzvah d'oraita as a yid, right? By the way, it's very interesting. Moshe Feinstein, just another interesting parenthesis. Sometimes the parentheses are more interesting than the halacha itself. But Moshe Feinstein has 5 tshuvot that I am aware of. 4 of them are printed in Igrot Moshe. One of them is in a different sefer, in regards to the halachot of Chalav Yisrael, in which he writes that a person should be machmir on Chalav Yisrael if he's a bar nefesh, right? In the first place, it says bar nefesh should be mahmir, and I am also mahmir. He says v'chen ani noheg. Bar nefesh is someone that's careful in his ways. So he holds meikar adin, a regular FDA approved OU milk is fine, even though it's not Chalav Yisrael in the United States only, because there's government supervision over them and so on, beyond the scope of this talk. But it says a Baal Nefesh should be Mahmir. So one of the tshuvot is a couple that was a Ger Tzedek asked him a question whether or not they should be Mahmir on Chalav Yisrael. What would you say? I say, they just became Jewish, like, let them be poor guys, like, don't be too tough on them. And Moshe says exactly the opposite. He says, these guys left their whole lifestyle, friends, circle of social, and they became Gerse. If they are not Baalei Nefesh, who is Baalei Nefesh? Because they're the biggest Baalei Nefesh. They left their whole life and they became Yidden, so they definitely should be Mahmir on Chalav Yisrael. So that in regards to Kriyat Shema would be like you became a Ger Tzedek right now, because again, a Ger Tzedek, even though that he has accepted the mitzvot, he's become a big Tameh Chacham, he's gotten Brit Milah, he's still a full-fledged Goy until he goes to mikveh. The moment he emerges out of the water, he's a Yid, a full-fledged Yid. So that moment, if it's after Alot before Netz, only in Hilchot Kriyat Shema, it may be considered night. So says the Peyoetz, say Shema right away and have in mind that this should be considered your Kriyat Shema of the night. But the Maaseh, it's not a full-fledged Tashlumin of the Kriyat Shema of the night. But for him, it would be good to do it in any case. Now, the Ben Ish Chai writes in the next point that we mentioned over here. We mentioned that we call it B'shochvecha because a group of people are still sleeping. So Ben Ish Chai says, even though that we say do it, doesn't mean that you are going to accomplish all of the tikkunim in olamot ha'elyonim al pi Kabbalah that you would do with a regular Kriyat Shema of Arvit. No, you do not. And therefore, as you see later on, in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Resh Lamed Hey, the Birkot Kriyat Shema of the Tfilah of Arvit, you could say according to Shulchan Aruch, right? Aside from the bracha of Hashkivenu, that bracha you should not say because that's not relevant any longer. People don't go to sleep at that time, even though that we call it Zman Shchiva, but Hashkivenu is going to sleep. Nobody goes to sleep after Alot HaShachar. No normal person should be going to sleep after Alot HaShachar. So the Ben Ish Chai brings this again according to Maran. That's what they should come out. But the Kaf Chaim writes that if you have less than 1 hour left to the Netzach Hama, you should not say Birkot Kriyat Shema altogether, because there are those who say that the time of Netzach Hama is hour before the sun comes out on Earth, on the globe, and therefore Safek Brachot La'aker says the Kaf Chaim. So again, Legabe Birkat Kriyat Shema is more debatable, but the Shema itself, a person should certainly say in that scenario. Says the Shulchan Aruch Sif Vav, even though that we mentioned already that you have 3 hours into the day to say Shema of the morning, Im avra sha'a shlishit velo kra'ah, if the 3rd hour passed and you haven't said Shema yet, Shalom, you could still read Kriyat Shema with the brachot the entire next hour, the entire 4th hour, Shehu Shalish Hayom, until the 3rd of the day. That means this is not 60-minute hours, 4 60-minute hours, but this is 4 hours Zimaniot. Again, remember, the day always is 12 hours, halachic hours. So halachic hours sometimes could be 50 minutes, sometimes it could be 70 minutes. Because if you have a 10-hour day, right, like right now 7 o'clock is Netzach Hama, 5 o'clock is Shkia, so you have a 10-hour day. If you multiple them and then divide it by 12, you'll end up with 50 minutes in every hour. Do the math, you'll see that's correct. And deep in the summer, when you have 14-hour days, the day starts at 5 and ends at 7, and it could be even longer than that. But if it's 14 hours, then you do the math. Every halachic hour would be 70 minutes, right? So when we talk about 4 hours from the morning, that means 4 Sha'ot Zmaniot until a 3rd of the day, right? So says the Shulchan Aruch, Im avra sha'a shlishit v'lo kara'ah, korot ta bebirchotea kol sha'a revi'it she'u shlish hayom. You don't get the reward of someone that read Shema on time, but at least you could say it still with the Brikot Kriyat Shema. And this is important. If even the fourth hour passed, you could read it, but you have to read it without its brachot. You no longer could say Birkot Kriyat Shema because you have lost the time of Kriyat Shema. Now, the fourth hour is known as the Zman Tfilah. Now, right now, Kriyat Shema Magen Avraham is 8:52 today, right? So if you add 50 minutes to that, which is the Shaot Zmaniot, you will end up with what? 9:40-ish. 9:40, 9:45 would be the time of Sof Zman Tfilah according to Magen Avraham. According to the Vilna Gaon, Zman Shema would be 9:28, right? And add the 40 minutes, whatever it is, 45 minutes to that, you'll end up with what? 10:18. 10:18 is latest Zman Tfilah for Ashkenazim who follow the Gra. So if you, Chas v'Shalom, partake in you're asked to, or you want to partake in a minyan that is 10 o'clock minyan, it should never happen for anyone. But if you do, then you cannot say Birkot Kriyat Shema. So according to Maran, you cannot say Birkot Kriyat Shema, and that's something serious to keep in mind. Now, let's just finish this. I'll tell you a story. Let me just say the story right now. I was once not feeling well, so I davened an 8:30 minyan, felt like a goy, and it was in a certain place that had many minyanim without specifying. And I finished, so I was learning afterwards. After the minyan, I was learning, and at 10 o'clock, some guy comes and is trying to get the minyan together. And I respectfully went over to him. I said, look, I hope you're not saying Birkot Kriyat Shema. And I said, of course we do. I was like, well, Shulchan Aruch says not like that. And he got very defensive. He said, well, we have our own Shulchan Aruch. I was like, oh no. So I was like, what's Shulchan Aruch? He said, I'm Chabad, so I have Shulchan Aruch Harav. I was like, actually, for your information, Shulchan Aruch Harav also passes like this. So he didn't see that coming. He was very, very surprised. Like, no. I was like, do you have a Shulchan Aruch Harav? I was like, yeah, of course. So he goes running to get the Shulchan Aruch Harav. I open it to our Siman, and I show it to him, how he brings the two shitot, and he paskins like this, that you should not be saying Birkat Kriyat Shema after the fourth hour. So he was flabbergasted. He didn't have anything else. To his credit, he went and he found out later on the minhag that they have is based on a Tzemach Tzedek later on. But nevertheless, even the first Lubavitcher Rebbe himself, he paskins in Shulchan Aruch Harav that a person should not be saying Birkat Kriyat Shema after the fourth hour. So that's something, it's a michshol. A person has to be careful, especially according to the Sfaradim, that we follow Kibalu Haraot Maran. Maran doesn't even bring the other Shita. Maran basically says if you missed Kriyat Shema until the end of fourth hour, and remember, our minhag would even be, according to the Magen Avraham, and according to him, we're talking about much earlier than 10:18 now today would be, right? It would be much earlier, as we mentioned. So that's the end of the bracha. So that's something to be mindful of, not to delay it if possible. If someone has been, like, all jokes aside, we humor this to make a point, but all humor aside, if someone is not feeling well and so on and so forth, at least they should try to do it sooner than the fourth hour if possible for them, even if that means to daven and be yahid at home versus b'tzibur. Sometimes the essential tefillah in a proper way would take precedent sometimes over Tefillah B'tzibur. So, says the Mishna Berurah, let's just finish this. Says the Mishna Berurah, if you read it, if you are reading Kriyat Shema later than the third hour, says the Mishna Berurah, even if you were Poshea, even if you could have done it before Sha'ar Revi'it and you didn't, Lemaaseh, you can still say it with the brachot during the fourth hour. It's not necessarily that you didn't read Kriyat Shema. Even if you read Kriyat Shema already with the Netzach Hama, but you didn't get around to saying the Birkot Kriyat Shema, you could still say Birkot Kriyat Shema during the fourth hour of the day, Sha'az Manit. Ela l'rbuta nakte, delo nemar kevan delo kera'a k'la data garua yoter. V'chen katav b'etea b'bet Yosef. It's coming to teach you a hidush that even if you didn't read at all, you can still read it and you can say it with the brachot. And in Mishkanot Yaakov, he disagrees with this. And he says, Hecha, the mitchila kara et kula. If you already read the whole thing from before, then maybe you should not be saying this in the same way. And the Kaf HaChaim seems to follow the Mishna Berurah and this one as well. So says the Mishna Berurah, Sha'ar Revi'it, the birchot enam shayachim likriyat Shema, because the brachot of Shema are not shayach to Kriyat Shema. So even though they're separate sugyot, so therefore, even though the time of Shema has passed and you don't get schar for reading Shema on time, but nevertheless, you could still say the brachot of Shema in the fourth hour. They're not the same thing as Shema. It's not a bracha that was nitkan on Shema, even though we call them Birkat Kriyat Shema. They're not like a Birkat Mitzvah. They're part of the Tefillah, so therefore you have time until Sof Zman Tefillah. Ve'arehem kemo Tefillah. Ve'lefichach dinam kemo Tefillat HaShachar. The din is like Tefillat HaShachar, shehu rak at Shlish Hayom. The Zman Tefillah is until Shlish Hayom. Avra Sha'ar Revi'it, this that Shulchan Aruch says, if the fourth hour passed, afilu nenas, even if you were forced, you had no choice. Afilu achi mikan ve'lach ifsida brachot. Even with that, you still lose the brachot, you cannot say it. Ve'im berach haveh bracha lebatala, says Mishna Berurah. If you say brachot after the fourth hour, you are saying bracha lebatala. So don't you say it. Haveh bracha lebatala, ve'ayen be'be'ur halacha. In Be'ur halacha, he explains it a little bit more over here, which is outside the scope of our talk right now. But nevertheless, there are those, again, as we mentioned before, that they say if you are anus, you could say the brachot afterwards. The Kaf HaChaim says, agrees with the Mishna Berurah that you cannot say it after the fourth hour. It's kasafek bracha lebatala, and therefore you should not say it. And same is the psak of Chacham Obadiah, and same comes out of the psak of Rabbi Zion Bashaul, based on what his students write in Or Letzion. Just last one over here. Korah ayin belevush katav yachol likrotav. Hakavara hu shetov sheyikra'ena kedei sheyikabel alav ol malchut shamayim. Maran wrote that if you miss the Sha'ar Revi'it, still the whole day you could read it without brachot. And the Bush says because you want to read it to accept ol malchut shamayim on yourself, you're not accepting the mitzvah of Shema. You don't get schar for that, but you want to still accept ol malchut shamayim on yourself. So therefore, you should do it, aval eno mechuyav. You're not obligated to doing it, right? Or Letzion gives an extra reason also that you should say it, because there are those who say that Zman Kriyat Shema Minat Torah is Kol Hayom. The diukim that they make in the language of Rambam and so on. So it says the Letzion say it, even though we don't pass in like that. You're certainly not mechuyav to say it, and don't get all the goodies, so to speak, that come with saying Shema on time. Says the Mishna Berurah, therefore you don't get the schar for it, but the maaseh you have this rest of the psukim. You have Zechilat Yetziat Mitzrayim, that you have an obligation every day to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim, and so on. So you get other benefits, but you don't get the schar of the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema every day. And B'ezrat Hashem will continue this in the days to come.